He planted a simple seed found in the municipal dump, and the miracle happened before his eyes. Amidst the desolation and poverty, hope was born where there was only despair. When the plant grew against all odds, it transformed not just the infertile soil, but an entire community. A story of unwavering faith, perseverance, and the power to see value where others see only trash. Get ready for an emotional journey. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching this incredible transformation from. The sun was setting, painting the parched horizon red, when John Smith, his hands calloused and shoulders stooped from the weight of his 60 years, walked dejectedly towards the municipal dump. His dragging steps left marks on the arid land, like scars on the soil that, like his heart, had been abandoned by the rain. The worst drought in the last 50 years had not only taken his harvest, but had also carried away the last thread of hope that kept his indomitable spirit upright. Who would have thought? John Smith. From farmer to scavenger, he murmured to himself, while his eyes, once alive like crystal-clear springs, now seemed like dry wells reflecting a sky without promises. The dump stretched out like a carpet of hopelessness, covered in remnants of what civilization discarded. There lay the leftovers of others' lives. Empty packaging, broken objects, shattered dreams. And it was in that desolate setting, among plastic bottles and rusty cans, that something captured his attention. A small shining point, almost imperceptible under the last rays of the sun, pulsed as if it were alive. John knelt down, his knees protesting with creaks that echoed the years of work on the land. His fingers, thick and marked by time, delicately picked up what seemed to be a seed. But it wasn't just any seed. This one had a peculiar shine, as if it held within it the moonlight that hadn't visited that forgotten piece of the world for months. What kind of plant would come from something found in a place like this? He wondered, as he turned the seed between his fingers, feeling its almost non-existent yet strangely significant weight. Most people would have discarded that curiosity, would have seen just another worthless object among so many others. But John had the gift of seeing possibilities where others saw only endings. It was this quality that had kept him steady after the premature departure of his wife, that had made him get up after every failed harvest, that had spurred him to keep going when his 3 sons left for the big city in search of what the Osika countryside could no longer offer. A seed, he murmured, placing it in the torn pocket of his faded flannel shirt close to his heart. Maybe this land is dead, but my hope still breathes. As he walked back to his small mud and straw hut, he felt the weight of the seed against his chest, as if it pulsed in sync with his tired heart. The sky, now dotted with indifferent stars, silently witnessed that encounter which, although it seemed insignificant, held the potential to change not only John's destiny, but that of the entire community of Harmony Springs. The next morning, even before the sun rose on the horizon, John was already awake. He examined the seed in the weak light of his kerosene lamp. He had never seen anything like it in his long years as a farmer. Its surface was not rough like a bean, nor smooth like corn. It had delicate streaks almost like bluish veins, and its color oscillated between golden and silver, depending on how the light touched it. "It's crazy to plant something unknown," said the voice of reason in his mind. "It's hope to sow when all is lost," his heart replied. And it was the heart that won that silent battle. With his hoe on his back, John went out into the yard. The soil of his small plot was so dry that cracks opened like wounds exposed to the sun. He chose a little corner protected by an old guava tree, the only tree that still bravely resisted the drought. "If something is going to grow in this hell, it will be here," he thought, as he dug a small hole with his hands. He placed the seed carefully, like someone putting a newborn in a cradle. He covered it with earth and, in a gesture that mixed faith and despair, poured his last bottle of drinking water over it. "Water is life," he murmured, "and if you're going to live, you need it more than I do." Upon returning inside, he found his neighbor, Peter Jones, a man with harsh features and unwavering pragmatism, standing at his door. "I saw you planting, John," he said, with a mixture of concern and disdain. "Didn't you learn anything from the last harvest?" "This land is dead, man," John looked at his friend with a tired smile. Maybe, but as long as there are hands to plant, there will always be a chance to harvest. Peter shook his head. Always stubborn as an old mule. And what did you plant this time? More bean for the grasshoppers to eat? I don't know what I planted, John replied sincerely. I found a seed in the dump yesterday. Something told me I should bring it home. Peter's laughter echoed through the dry land. In the dump? Now you're a dump seed collector? John, you used to be the best farmer in this place. Now you're planting trash. Peter's words would sting like salt in an open wound, were it not for the fact that John had already grown accustomed to life's hard truths. Hope, after all, had always been his most loyal companion, even when all the facts pointed to the futility of his efforts. Perhaps, he replied serenely, but one man's trash is another man's treasure. We'll see what God has in store for this seed. Peter left, still laughing, and his laughter multiplied throughout the village when, in the following days, he spread the story of old John and his dump seed. Soon the farmer became the object of jokes among the residents, who found in that story a brief relief from their own miseries. But something extraordinary happened the following dawn. John, in his restless sleep, was awakened by a soft glow that filtered through the cracks in his window. He first thought it was the moon, but the sky was cloudy without the presence of the silvery orb. Intrigued, he got up and walked to the yard. There, where he had planted the seed, a small green stem emerged from the earth, emanating a bluish luminescence that seemed to defy the darkness of the night. The sprout, which should not have existed, not in that barren land, not without water, not in just one day, was there vibrant and full of life. John knelt down before that miracle, silent tears streaming down his wrinkled face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." To the sky, to the earth, to the universe that seemed to have finally heard his prayers. News of the miracle sprout spread with the speed that only small communities know. At first, many didn't believe it. Then they came to see with their own eyes. The plant grew at a supernatural pace, gaining inches every hour, defying everything those farmers knew about nature and its cycles. Among the curious was Mrs. Eleanor, the village elder, a 92-year-old woman who carried in her eyes, clouded by age, the ancestral wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to see everything. "It is the plant of providence," she declared, after examining the stem, already almost half a meter tall. "It is in the sacred texts of the ancients, a plant that only appears in times of great trial, sent to test our faith and renew our strength." "And what does it yield, Mrs. Eleanor?" asked Maria Rodriguez, a young mother of 3. "My sons, who had been struggling to feed them since her husband left to try one's luck in the capital city." The old woman smiled enigmatically. "Only time and the heart of the one who cultivates it can tell, my son. Each plant of providence bears a different fruit, suited to the need of the one who received it." Mrs. Eleanor's words, mixing folk wisdom and mysticism, only increased the fascination with John's plant. In the following days, the village was divided. There were the skeptics, led by Peter Jones, who sought rational explanations for that phenomenon. Perhaps an unknown species brought by migratory birds, or a genetically modified plant discarded in clandestine experiments. And there were the believers who saw the plant as a divine sign, a promise that the times of scarcity would end. John, meanwhile, remained apart from those discussions. Each morning and each evening he sat beside the plant, talking to it as if it were an old friend. He told it about his life, his fears, his hopes. He spoke of Isabel, his late wife, and how she would have loved to see that wonder grow in his yard. He mentioned his distant "my sons," and how he dreamed they would one day return home. "They think I talk to myself," he commented once, stroking the leaves that were already opening in a vibrant green. "But you listen to me, don't you? You understand what it is to be alone, being born where no one believed it was possible." It was during the 3rd week that the first major turning point occurred. The plant, which already reached the height of a man, began to flower. They were not ordinary flowers. They had a blue so intense it almost hurt the eyes, as if pieces of the sky had been captured in their petals. The aroma they emanated was indescribable. sweet like honey but with notes of something unknown, almost ethereal. Even more extraordinary was what came with the flowers. First one bee, then two, then a small swarm. Bees, which had disappeared from the region with the drought, now buzzed happily around the blue flowers. Butterflies, fireflies, and hummingbirds followed suit, as if that unique plant had emitted a silent call that only they could hear. "It's as if life is returning," John commented to Mrs. Eleanor, who now visited him regularly. "Life never left, my son," the wise old woman replied. "It merely hid, waiting for someone courageous enough to call it back." The elder's words weighed on John's shoulders. Was he truly the chosen one to bring life back to that ravaged land? What had he done to deserve such honor? And more importantly, would he be worthy of such responsibility? It was at this point that John began to feel the inner conflict that often accompanies those touched by grace. At night, alone in his mud and straw hut, he questioned himself. Why does my plant prosper while others' crops remain dry? Is it fair to receive so many blessings while my neighbors suffer? This silent struggle against growing pride and sense of justice intensified when a delegation of merchants, attracted by rumors about the miracle plant, arrived in the village. Their leader, a stout man named Augustus Merchant, offered John a considerable sum for the blue flowers. "They are extremely rare," he explained, examining a petal against the light. "They can be used for very valuable dyes. Nobility and royalty would pay fortunes for fabrics dyed with this celestial blue." The offer was tempting. The money would be enough to rebuild his life, perhaps even to buy better land in a more fertile region. John could finally live his last years in comfort, without the worries that had always accompanied him. However, something inside him refused to accept the proposal. "They are not for sale," he finally said to the astonishment of everyone present. "Be reasonable, man," Augustus insisted. "What good are these flowers to you? With the money I'm offering, you could buy enough seeds to plant 10 fields like this one." John's eyes, however, remained firm. "What I received as a blessing is priceless. It was no accident that this plant ended up in my hands. It is not mine to sell." Augustus Merchant left furious, swearing he would return with a better offer. John, meanwhile, spent the night awake, crying silently, wondering if he had made the right decision. Poverty was a cruel companion, and he had invited it to stay longer in his home by refusing that generous offer. The answer to his doubts came in the person of a young scholar named Gabriel, who arrived in the village a few days later, carrying books and scientific instruments. Unlike the merchants, he was not interested in profiting from the plant, but in studying it. "It's extraordinary," he exclaimed, after examining the roots that were beginning to extend beyond John's yard. "This species has incredible regenerative capabilities. Its roots are absorbing toxins from the soil and releasing essential nutrients. They are, literally, bringing the soil back to life." The young scientist's words completely transformed the perception of the plant. It was not just a beautiful or curious phenomenon. It was a potential solution to the biggest problem that community faced: the unproductive land. It was then that John made a decision that would forever change the destiny of Harmony Springs. Instead of keeping the plant for himself, he began distributing its seeds, small bluish pearls that formed after the flowers fell, to all neighbors who wanted to try one's luck planting them. "I can't guarantee they will grow like mine," he humbly warned. "Perhaps there is something special about my yard, or perhaps it is just luck, but it's worth a try." Not everyone accepted the offer. Peter Jones, the most skeptical, vehemently refused. "It's some kind of parasite plant that will suck the little good that remains in our land," he proclaimed to the four winds. "In a few months, we'll see the damage it caused." But Cecilia, his 16-year-old son who suffered from a chronic respiratory illness, thought differently. Secretly, she collected one of the seeds that John had dropped and planted it near her bedroom window. To her surprise and joy, the seed germinated in a few days, and soon a small green stem emerged from the earth, promising flowers as blue as the sky she contemplated during her days of confinement. Even more surprising was the discovery she made. As the plant grew, her symptoms seemed to decrease. Her breathing, previously heavy and painful, became easier, her nighttime coughing fits less frequent. It was as if that plant emitted not only oxygen, but also some kind of healing property that her lungs desperately needed. When Peter Jones finally noticed the improvement in my son's condition, his skepticism began to crumble. Confronted with the evidence of his own eyes, Cecilia running through the yard for the first time in years, her cheeks rosy, her eyes bright, he could no longer deny that there was something special about those plants. On a moonlit night, he knocked on John's door. The two men, both hardened by difficult lives, stared at each other for a long moment before Peter finally broke the silence. My son, she's better. Thanks to that plant you hid from me." John nodded without a trace of judgment in his eyes. "Children often see what we adults refuse to see. I would like some seeds," Peter continued, swallowing his pride that had always been his greatest companion. "If you are still willing to share them after how I treated you." A gentle smile formed on John's lips. "The seeds are not mine to give or deny, Peter. They were always yours to take. They were just waiting for you to be ready to receive them." That conversation under the moonlight marked a new phase for the community of Harmony Springs. Now everyone, even the most skeptical, wanted to cultivate the blue plants. Every yard, every garden, every available piece of land was soon dotted with flowers so blue they seemed to reflect a sky no one had seen for a long time. 6 months after planting the first seed, something even more extraordinary happened. The wells, which had dried up years ago, slowly began to replenish. At first, it was just a thin layer of water at the bottom of the community well, but gradually the level rose. Analyses carried out by Gabriel, the young scientist who now resided permanently in the village to study the phenomenon, confirmed the unthinkable. The plant's roots were somehow attracting moisture from depths that human technologies could not reach. "It's as if they are naturally drilling down to an underground aquifer," he explained, marveling. "They are creating natural channels through which water can rise back to the surface." The news spread quickly beyond the village limits. Journalists, scientists, curious onlookers, everyone wanted to see the miracle of the small town that had defeated the drought with a mysterious plant. John, now treated as a kind of local prophet, felt increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. "I wasn't the one who did this," he always insisted whenever someone tried to attribute the merit to him. "I was just the first to believe that something could grow, even in the most unlikely place." This sincere humility only increased people's admiration. Stories about the farmer of the impossible began to spread, often exaggerated, turning John into an almost mythical figure. It was said that he could talk to plants, that he had been visited by angels on the night he found the seed, that he possessed healing powers through his hands. All these stories weighed on John like an invisible cross. He, who had always been a simple man, now found himself at the center of a fame he never desired. The internal conflict intensified. Was this his purpose in life, or was he diverting people from the true meaning of that miracle? The answer came unexpectedly, amidst a crisis that seemed destined to destroy everything they had achieved. A sandstorm, a rare phenomenon even in that ravaged region, advanced mercilessly towards the village. The forecasts were catastrophic. The force of the winds could rip up the miracle plants, burying them under tons of sand and destroying any chance of recovery for that land. In the face of that threat, John demonstrated the true leadership that had always been dormant within him. Instead of focusing only on protecting his own crop, he organized the entire community to create protective barriers around all cultivated areas. Men, women, and children worked tirelessly under his guidance, erecting woven straw fences, digging trenches to divert the flow of sand, covering the younger plants with baskets and fabrics. "A single plant can be uprooted by the wind," John explained as they worked. "But an entire field firmly rooted will withstand the storm. It's like us, people. Alone we are weak. Together we are strong enough to face any challenge." For 3 days and 3 nights the storm roared over Harmony Springs. The inhabitants took shelter in their homes, praying that their hard work had not been in vain. When the winds finally subsided and they could go out to assess the damage, they found a transformed scenario. Sand dunes had formed at the edges of the village, but the barriers had worked. Even more impressive, the roots of the older plants had effectively held the soil, preventing it from being carried away by the wind. It was at that moment that John fully understood the meaning of everything that had happened. It wasn't just about a miracle plant or regenerated soil. It was about community, about people working together for a greater good, about faith that transcends logic and reason. This understanding was put to the test when, a few weeks after the Yabise storm, a caravan of refugees arrived in the village. They were families from an even more devastated region, attracted by rumors about the oasis in the desert that Harmony Springs had become. The Council of Elders met to decide whether or not to welcome the newcomers. "Our resources are limited," argued one of the counselors. "We barely have enough for ourselves. If we share, we may fall back into need." It was a valid argument based on the legitimate fear of returning to the scarcity they had known so well. But John, who now was part of the council due to the respect he had earned, saw the situation from another perspective. "When I found that first seed, I was as desperate as they are," he said calmly. "If I had been sent away, if no one had believed in me or given me a chance, where would we be today?" His words touched the hearts of those present, reminding them that true scarcity was not in the land or resources, but in the fear that closed hearts and minds to new possibilities. "Besides," he continued, "more hands mean more work, and there is much to be done if we want to expand the cultivated areas." After long deliberation, the council decided to welcome the refugees, offering them temporary shelter and the opportunity to integrate into the community. John personally opened the doors of his mud and straw hut to a young family with 3 small my sons, whose frightened eyes reminded him of his own my sons when they left. 9 months after planting the first seed, what many considered the greatest of all miracles occurred. The oldest plants, now over 2 meters tall, began to produce fruit. They were not large or particularly beautiful, small spheres of a deep green, similar to tiny apples. But when Gabriel analyzed them in his small, makeshift laboratory, the discovery was astonishing. "These fruits contain more nutrients than any food I have ever analyzed," he announced, barely containing the excitement in his young voice. "Proteins, vitamins, minerals. It's as if they were designed to provide exactly what the human body needs." True to John's character, the first fruits were distributed not to the strongest or most influential, but to the most vulnerable: children, the elderly, and the sick. Among them was Mrs. Eleanor, the elder whose eyes, clouded by age, now shone with renewed lucidity after a few weeks of regularly consuming the miracle fruits. "I always knew you were special, John," she said, holding the farmer's calloused hands in her own, wrinkled by time. "Since you were a boy, you had this light inside you, this ability to see beyond the obvious." John shook his head, uncomfortable with the compliment. "I'm not special, Mrs. Eleanor. I'm just an old John who refused to accept that there was no more hope." The elder smiled, the wisdom of nearly a century reflected in every wrinkle of her face. "And isn't that the greatest of all qualities? The stubbornness to believe when everyone else has given up?" With the increasing production of fruits, soon the village had not only enough to properly feed all its inhabitants, but also surplus to commercialize. Ironically, one of the first buyers was Augustus Merchant, the same man who had tried to buy the blue flowers months earlier. Now he offered a fair price for the nutritious fruits, which were already beginning to gain reputation in distant cities for their medicinal properties. Weeks turned into months and months into seasons. A full year had passed since John found that first seed in the dump. And what a transformation! Where before there was only desolation, now a renewed community flourished. The green fields stretched beyond the original village limits. Water flowed, again in the wells and small streams, and the air carried the sweet perfume of the blue flowers. Even more impressive was the transformation of the dump itself. That place which had been a symbol of despair and failure was now gradually turning into a community garden. The miracle plants, strategically planted throughout the area, slowly purified the contaminated soil. Children who had never known anything but aridity now ran between rows of vegetables and flowers. their laughter echoing like music in a land that had forgotten the sound of joy. The fame of Harmony Springs grew so much that it attracted the attention of the regional authorities. Government representatives arrived to investigate the phenomenon, initially skeptical, later amazed. Instead of the forced appropriation many feared, they proposed a partnership. They wanted to study the miracle plants and implement the method in other regions devastated by drought. It was at this time that John, now revered as a kind of local hero, felt he needed to clarify some things. In a community assembly, he asked to speak. His body, even more bent by time and hard work, seemed small before the crowd. But when he began to speak, his voice carried an authority that came not from power, but from humility and truth. "My friends, my brothers and sisters," he began, "many of you look at me as if I had accomplished some great feat, as if I were the one who brought life back to our land." He paused, his eyes scanning the attentive faces watching him. "But the truth is, it wasn't I who brought life to the land. It was the land that brought life to me." A murmur ran through the crowd as John continued, his voice thick with emotion. "When I lost my harvest, when I found myself alone and desperate, walking to the dump like a defeated man, I was dead inside. The drought had taken not only my crop, but also my faith, my hope, my reason for continuing." Silent tears now streamed down his wrinkled face, but he made no effort to hide them. That seed wasn't just a gift for our land. It was a gift for my heart. It reminded me that even in the most unlikely places, life finds a way. It taught me that giving up is the only true death. And then, with a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire gathered community, he concluded, "The true miracle wasn't what happened to our lands. It was what happened to our hearts. We learned to work together. We learned to trust again, in each other, in the land, in the divine plan that we often cannot see." 18 months after that fateful day at the dump, Harmony Springs had transformed radically. Where before there was only desolation, now a renewed community flourished with enough water, abundant food, and, most importantly, restored hope. The blue plants now dotted the landscape for miles, their deep roots stabilizing the soil and bringing back lost moisture, their flowers attracting pollinators that had disappeared decades ago, their fruits nourishing bodies and spirits. John, despite the fame and opportunities for enrichment that arose, remained true to his simple nature. He continued living in his mud and straw hut, now surrounded by a lush garden, where he cultivated not only the miracle plants, but also the vegetables and flowers he had always loved. Each morning, upon waking, his first gesture was to look out the window at the flourishing garden and give thanks, not for material wealth or recognition, but for the most precious lesson he had learned, that in the right hands, even trash can turn into a miracle. And as for that first plant, the pioneer, that had started the whole transformation, it was still there, now a majestic tree in the center of John's yard. Its branches extended like welcoming arms over the mud and straw hut, and at night, if you watched closely, you could still see a faint bluish glow emanating from its leaves, a silent reminder that hope, even when it seems to disappear completely, is merely dormant, waiting for someone courageous enough to believe in the impossible. Sometimes, when the sun sets painting the horizon red, John sits under the branches of that tree, his eyes now more alive than ever, contemplating the miracle that blossomed from a simple seed found in the dump. And if you are nearby, perhaps you will hear him murmur softly to himself with a serene smile on his lips, "The land may be dead, but as long as there is a seed to plant and hands willing to care for it, hope will always find a way to flourish." And isn't that the deepest truth we all seek in our lives? That even in the darkest moments, when all seems lost, all it takes is a small seed of hope to transform deserts into gardens, despair into promise, endings into new beginnings. Look around you. What seeds are you planting today? In what seemingly sterile soil can you cultivate a miracle? Perhaps like John, you just need the courage to believe that even in the most unlikely place, life always finds a way.